I just wanted to do a couple little videos about kind of tips around the wood shop that I think about, little tiny things I picked up along the way that could kind of help you with some things. One of the first videos I wanted to make was clamping. So a lot of times when you're clamping something, the amount of pressure you have can really affect the joint. So if you don't have ample pressure on the joint, it won't close properly and it could leave a glue line. So a case where that happens to me a lot, because I use a lot of angles, I have things that are not square to one another. So if I look at this rocking chair, I have this leg coming back, and the other side I have the other leg. And they come in at about a 6-degree angle. So when I try to put a clamp to clamp this, to squeeze it into the chair when I attach it, that angle creates a problem. I can't get a really good clamp. I can't get good clamping force. So here's the little thing I do. Okay, so what I've done is I've put the pieces together that I'm going to potentially be gluing together. I have an articulating head on the one side, which is okay, but the clamp can still slide. On this side, it's fixed, so you can see this gap in here. That's my problem. I don't want that gap, because basically what happens is my only point of force is right here, so that clamp is going to slide off and I'm not going to get good clamping pressure. So what I've done is I've actually cut a wedge that is roughly the angle that this leg is coming back at. So what I need to do is I need to get this wedge in here. Now again, because I have this angle on both sides, I'm going to do this to both sides, but just as an example, I'll just do it to the one side here. So what I do is I take my piece of wood that I've made the wedge with, I take a piece of tape, and I basically just tape it on like this, okay? And I will do this on both sides, just as an example. Now when I go to put the clamp on, okay, so now you can see the clamp has a full face, touching the piece of wood that I want to glue. So this is going to give me a much stronger clamping force for this joint. For the clamping angle issue, I've made this little wedge. So what you can do is you can take a scrap piece of wood. You can also do this on a table saw if you have an angle jig, but if not, all you have to do is take your scrap piece of wood. You can just draw on whatever you need for an angle. So let's say I measured out my angle to be, maybe roughly like this. All I do is set my miter saw to that angle and just cut it off, and then you can make your wedge. Now, it's just difficult to do with small scraps. You want to be careful, because this piece of wood, if you're trying to cut something too small, it won't hit your fence properly, or it could actually get caught with the saw. So if you do this, I strongly suggest you use a large piece of wood and just cut off a piece. Okay, for this next little clamping tip, I'm using just a little F-clamp. And in this situation, I had to put a lot of force this way and that way. So in this case, what was happening to me is this is actually a particularly good clamp, and this spins really freely. But sometimes you get a clamp where it's stiff in here. Maybe you have to put some oil or WD-40 in there to keep it nice and loose. But with a lot of clamps, if they get kind of a little bit older, what'll happen is when you go to tighten this, it starts to wander. There's a slight angle in there. It's not very big, but just a tiny bit. What happens is as I tighten it, it'll actually slide in. So what I do to combat that is I'll just take a little piece of sandpaper. So this is 180 grit. I'll fold it in half. This can get a little bit tough with just two hands, but what I'm trying to do is I just take that piece of sandpaper and slide it in between. And then when I go to clamp, it makes a nice rough surface between the wood and the clamp head. So now when I go to tighten it, it doesn't wander. The only thing is, try to make sure to leave your sandpaper away from the joint so you can check the joint to make sure it's nice and tight. When I'm working on a rocking chair, it's really hard to get access to the front, the side, the back, and all the way around. So what I do is I take a board. In this case, I just took a nice big piece of ash. It's kind of what I had. I would have preferred something maybe 2 inches thick, but this is just 1 inch. But what I do is I take this board, I clamp it to my work surface, and then this extends out, and the board itself is more narrow than the chair seat. So now I'm able to work on all sides, and I can pull this back a little bit, and I can actually work on the back as well. Just want to take a quick look at a device for clamping laminations. So this I learned from Hal Taylor and Paul at Canadian Woodworks. You should check them out. Both their work is really great. But essentially what you have here, you've got a big form, in this case that I've made out of pine. So what I did is I took large pieces of, I think this is, yeah, just giant pieces of pine, and I've glued them together. I have a nice base there. And then what you have on the side are large holes for the clamps. So what happens is you're able to get lots of clamps all along the length of the lamination, and you get really good clamping force because there are so many clamps basically per inch. Kind of see how it works there. And right now I have a rocker for a rocking chair laminated up here. So this is a great device. I've done this before, so now if I make a form that I want, what I do is I just take a big Forstner bit and drill holes, and then I have a really good clamping surface. And then you have these aluminum pieces on the side to align everything, so you can kind of push your laminations up against the edge of this aluminum, and that keeps all the laminations parallel along the sides. I have a lot of these. They're ROK F clamps, and what I really like about them is they have a nice big handle, so they're easy to grip, nice big threads. They're really strong, and I think this was $12. So when it really comes down to it, this is a really great clamp for the dollar. I would say probably my favorite clamp that I have in my shop are these Bessie clamps. So what's great about this, super strong. It has a nice big face, nice big wheels. They articulate a lot, so that's really good. So you get a lot of movement. So you have something with a bit of curve on or something it can accommodate. Nice big handles, and they're just super strong. I really like these. The only downfall is, you know, they're maybe a little bit expensive, but personally, I think they're worth the money. So this is probably one of my favorite clamps. This guy, I really like it because it has this locking mechanism. So if you're trying to do kind of a complicated clamp situation, this locks this part of the clamp in place so it won't slide all over the place. If it's loose, it is kind of nice because it'll just move around easily. But when it comes to clamping things up, it can be very difficult if this is moving freely to actually get it to sit in the right spot. This big guy, it's a Bessie clamp. I just love it because it's super strong. Even though it has a significant length to it, I think this is a 42 inch or maybe a 40 inch. The good thing about it is the bar itself stays quite straight, so you don't get a lot of flex, which keeps your head straight. And it's just the mechanism for actually locking the clamp is really, really solid, and it's really strong. So these are some of my favorite clamps. Now this guy, I don't use it very often. This bar flexes a lot, but there are certain situations where it works very, very well. Sometimes if I'm trying to clamp something that's curved and I can't get like the faces of the clamps sitting flush, it just comes in really handy. And sometimes I just need to lock something in place just to kind of line things up, and these work really, really well. They also make smaller versions of them. One thing I really like in my shop is this granite countertop. So whenever I'm looking to glue something flat, I'm able to put it onto this surface and clamp tight to it. So if I'm trying to glue two boards together, I need them to be perfectly flush with one another, I can put it on this top and it works very, very well. So another clamp I really like is this kind of F clamp that just has a normal base and then a top without a rubber stop or anything. So these are used for track saws usually. This one's by Festool, this one's by Makita. Beyond the track saw, what I really like is I'm able to take a template, drill a 1/2 inch hole in it, and I can use these clamps to hold the template in place. Normal clamp, the head's in the way of the router, and so you won't be able to router the full shape of whatever you're trying to remove wood on. So this is in the way. With this guy, I'm able to just get the clamp head out of the way, and it provides downward pressure, but then it also provides a lot of side-to-side motion too, so it's not going to twist or anything like that. So I find it, because these pads they can slide, so there's not a lot of side-to-side support, but this guy is basically locked in there, so it keeps the template from rotating. So I really like these clamps for that reason. Another really handy clamp I like to have in my shop are these little guys. Again, these are ROK. This is a 4-inch. I think they're $3, maybe $4. What I like to do with these guys, let's say I'm trying to do something with a straight edge, I can just clamp that there. I can clamp this end down here, and if I'm drawing a line, it's just really helpful. They're just really excellent for these kind of things. So if I need to make a straight line on something, they hold my straight edge in place, and I can just make whatever marking I need. So these little guys are awesome to have in the shop. So it's kind of an interesting situation here. I'm trying to clamp this arm so it's flat, but if I put a clamp around the side, for me to get the clamp underneath the chair, it's pushing the top over too far, so it'll actually cause it to tilt. So in these situations, what I've started doing is I take a piece of wood and I'll put it, in this case, I'll just put it right underneath the chair, like that. So I have some overhang on each side. And what I'll do, okay, so now this board is held in place. Now it'll actually clamp flat. So I've got another interesting situation here where I need to put a clamp from the front of this arm to back here. And we talked about wedges earlier and stuff like that, but you can't really get a wedge in here. I mean, this is just kind of floating, so you've got this awkward situation where this is going to slide off. So I normally use these for rockers when I'm doing the transition between the rocker and the leg. But what it is just a piece of pine that has a bit of a curve in it. And then, so it's just a square, and I've cut with a bandsaw, I put like a little curve in there. So this round surface matches this round surface, so it keeps the clamp in place really nicely. And then I just covered it with a sock, so there's glue here and glue here, and then there's a sock. So I can put this on top. Okay, so because it's curved, it'll sit nicely on this curved edge here. So let's get my clamp a little bit closer. So now I can get the clamp on there nice and tight, okay? So this curve in here formed to this part of the leg. And I mean, you can make the cut on this little piece of pine however big you want, whatever dimension you're requiring. So this is really helpful to keep a clamp nice and flush on a totally round surface. And you can never have too many clamps. They're just, they're so usable, all different shapes and sizes. Got a lot there. Got all my bar clamps and some of my other larger F clamps on the wall here in a nice little stand.